All right, everybody, welcome back to Sports Bashes live on 97.3 ESPN, the free mobile app. And, of course, you can watch the show live on our website, 973ESPN.com. All right, Flyers season is coming to a close. You can hear the game tonight against the New Jersey Devils. Coverage begins at 7 o'clock. All season long, you've been covering it. Kevin Durso, let's start with this, man. First off, how are you? This season has been dreadful. Are you making it?
I've made it through. So,
All right.
I've kind of said I need a vacation after this one.
Oh, man. So let's start with this.
Mm-hmm.
How did it get here? Because we had high expectations. This was a team that was the number one seed. No matter how they got it last year. They were going to be a top 3 seed. So how did it fall so far, so fast?
I mean, it's really tough to say what singular thing contributed to it. It felt like just a snowball effect of one thing after another piling up from top to bottom. It seemed like the goaltending wasn't very good this year. The defense wasn't very good this year. They lost guys who turned out to be key contributors on the offensive side to COVID at a stretch, so that was a problem. It just seemed like it all piled up. And realistically, they had a good record after the first month of the season into February, but they weren't playing their best then. There were signs that it really needed to turn quickly. It didn't. And when they came back from the COVID pause that they had, and there were guys who were clearly affected by it, it seemed like a bunch of factors then contributed to the downfall from there, and it had to do with the same issues that they had on the ice from prior to that pause, any effects that they would have had from being paused by COVID, some of the players having it, the fact that there were so many games piled up one after the other, a lot of back-to-backs that can contribute to injuries hitting you as well. Alain Vigneault's kind of hinted in the last couple of days he wasn't going to talk about the whole big picture of the season until after the season was over. But he kind of hinted like he had something he wanted to say, and like that in theory, I feel like I know what happened, but I'm not going to talk about it until the season's over. So when they have exit interviews later this week and we get to hear that actual theory behind it, I'm sure that there will be multiple things he has to say that contribute to it. But I ultimately think that also this team just didn't show what they are fully capable of. And I think that the amount of games that they had in a row and the fact that they were losing the way they were just contributed even further to it, that they kind of just lost that desire to play and that will to go to work because it was just piling on. And that's not the approach you can take, but I feel like that's the way it was. It became tired for them.
All right, I want to go down a couple things real fast, and when they have the exit interviews, we'll have Durso back on as he gets that information. But I sent you there was a report in the New York Post about a week or two ago that suggested Vigneault could be on the hot seat, liking it to what happened in New York, that they had a good season and that he grinds on guys, and that we see this in hockey so much, where the hockey coach, for whatever reason, Kevin, seems to turn over. In your mind, number one, is he at fault for any of the problems that this team has? And number two, do you deem him on the hot seat?
Well, he's partially to blame for some of it because his job is to get the players ready to play the game. And he is a coach that prides himself on the practice time, and they did not have a lot of it this year, so it's not an excuse. Every team dealt with that, but if that's his style, then I feel like that's why last year was the way it was, why this year went the way it did, and why hopefully, given the opportunity, next year would be somewhat better because he gets more time to work with players in the practice setting. That being said, I don't see anything happening to him from the Flyers side, if you will, in terms of everybody who's come out and said something has said he's safe. Chuck Fletcher has said so. Dave Scott has said so. It sounds like he's safe in that regard. I think the question is, does he want to be here? And that's why I think that it was worded very craftily in that article that it's not a certainty he'll return. That doesn't say that means the team's considering getting rid of him, but maybe he's thinking something. So we'd have to see where that goes. I definitely don't think the coaching staff is completely untouchable. That I will say. But I don't think he's the person to blame, and I think he'd want to be back, and I hope he'd want to be back because I think he's got unfinished business here. They had a good run the previous year. It was a weird year for everybody involved, and maybe you move forward and see what happens when you start with something new and make some changes at different spots on the roster.
All right, so different spots on the roster, changes. Let's start with the expansion draft and how that will affect this team.
I mean, it could affect them in a couple of ways. I mean, to one extent, it could affect it very minimally, and the easy thing for a team like Seattle to do is look at a guy, say, like Nick Aube-Kubel, who's at 24 years old, is going to be entering the prime of his career. He's on a low-paying contract, and they get a player who has maybe a decent amount of potential to be somebody who grows into a role with a new team. And from the Flyers standpoint, they get no help because it's not much of a cap relief. On the other hand, the Flyers could really try to get crafty with this and do what a lot of teams did when Vegas drafted an expansion and start trying to find a way to unload a big contract and maybe, beef up the offer a little bit, draft picks, prospects, you name it, to try to figure out, and that might be what it takes to entice a team to take a James Van Riemsdyk or a Jake Voracek off of your roster. And I think really that's the type of move that has to happen. It's interesting. I don't really blame those players completely for the problems this year. I mean, they're going to be Claude Giroux, James Van Riemsdyk, and Jake Voracek are your top three in points this year, which kind of shows you what happened from the development standpoint, that development-wise, they didn't get the contributions they were expecting from younger players. But if you're going to make a change that really hits the locker room, I think doing it among maybe those two guys I mentioned really hits home.
Well, Voracek,
and that's why I think they need to.
Voracek would be the big guy. I mean, it feels like Giroux's not going anywhere. It's his final season. I would imagine the Flyers want him to finish this season. What happens to him after the contract, that's another conversation. But it feels like they have to separate those two guys and figure out a way to move Voracek. So is that at the top of the list, do you think, for Chuck Fletcher?
I wouldn't call it top of the list. I mean, top of the list is what he more likely what he needs to bring in than what he needs to unload. But I feel like for what he needs to bring in, it's got to be close to the top of the list to at least sit there and say, and again, maybe it's not Voracek, maybe it's JVR who makes $7 million a year. It's the cap space. You need to find a way to clear one of those two big contracts. JVR is a $7 million. And Voracek's slightly over 8, so it's about 8.2, I believe, is what it is. You need that kind of cap space, and you need to find a way. And I don't think that they're going to get away with that without retaining some money there. But even if you retain 25% of that, you get $6 million back on Jake Voracek. That's enough to go out and get a top-pairing defenseman to play with Ivan Provorov, which is what I think is their biggest need this offseason. So that's the top of the list to me, is the defenseman to play with Provorov. But to do that, it probably requires some really tactful work in the offseason, and I think that a trade like that would certainly fit the bill.
All right, and then obviously there are a lot of younger players that you've got a chance to see over the last 2 weeks here. Are any of the guys that you've seen over the last couple of weeks factoring into helping this team next season?
Well, definitely some of the guys who we've actually seen all year but who have continued to progress throughout the year. So Joel Farabee factors in big time. He's leading the team in goals, and he's 21. So his pace is somewhere in approaching the 30-goal mark at 21. So if he can continue to grow in that perspective, they've got something there for sure. And I certainly think that they're not going to stray away from Oscar Lindblom yet at all, because, weird year for him as well. And he went from battling cancer to trying to make a return from that, to battling COVID, trying to make a return from that. And he still produced at a modest enough rate that you say, give him another year and maybe it'll just continue to get better. I definitely think you've seen a lot out of Cam York in just 2 games, and he'll play his third on Monday night. So it seems like you've got something with him. He already looks like a fit in the top 6, which, again, the bar not really being set high, but he looks like a fit. And I've liked what I've seen from Wade Allison so far. I mean, I don't know if they're going to keep him around. They might dangle him as a piece that you can get something significant in return for. Again, maybe that's the type of prospect that a Seattle's looking for to take on the Jake Voracek contract. But if they do end up with him, he's shown not only the ability to go to the net and score goals, he's got a great shot. He's shown the ability to hang in there physically and make plays. I'd like to see him get it. He certainly seemed like, it was funny. Alain Vigneault kind of said, I don't put a lot of weight and put a lot of into these last few games at the end of a season when you're playing them out. But it looked like Allison over the weekend took it personally and said, no, I'm penciling my name into the lineup next year right now. I want to claim a spot pretty much right now and see where it goes from there. So I think that's another guy to keep an eye on. And certainly there's others who haven't gotten as much time to play in these last couple of weeks that you would have liked to have seen. I mean, Tanner Lazinski was a guy who I thought was doing some good things and playing a good bottom 6 role, and then got hurt and is out for the rest of the year. So, he's missed an opportunity there, unfortunately, but you hope that he comes into camp healthy and ready to show something as well. So those are all guys who I think are worth watching again one more time and see where they go after another offseason.
Kevin, obviously at the trade deadline, they didn't do much of anything. So who is tradable this offseason?
Geez, I don't know if I would put many people off of the table, to be honest. I would say, I mean, obviously Claude Giroux's not tradable and Kevin Hayes is not tradable with the no movement clauses in their contracts. And then from there, I mean, unless money becomes the big holdup, and I mean, realistically, if money's the holdup, then Jake Voracek would be off the table. But I mean, I don't know if anybody else beyond that. I mean, I would sit there and say that they've pretty much committed to Scott Lawton by signing him to the extension. I don't see them looking at Joel Farabee in any way and saying they want to move on from him. I don't see them saying that about Ivan Provorov, and I don't see them saying that about Carter Hart. That's probably just about it. I mean, maybe at forward also I would say Lindblom factors into that because the inspirational story is kind of enough to keep him here, especially when he did come back and produced decently at times. He had a couple. I mean, he had a multi-goal game earlier in the year that won him the game, so he can do it. It's just not as regular as you'd like at this. And it look, that takes time when he went through what he went through. Other than that, I mean, maybe Sean Couturier as well as a guy who they might say it would take a lot to trade him. But other than that, I think everybody's on the table.
What is your message to the listeners and the Flyers fans about what we saw from Carter Hart this year? Is he the guy that we saw last year? And I've said many times, Kevin, this team, we were excited about this team, not because of Claude Giroux and Kevin Hayes and Voracek. It was because you finally felt they had the goalie. It's the only reason that I got excited about where this team was. And the goalie didn't play that well. Was it because he doesn't know how to play, or is it a factor of, is Carson Wentz not that bad, but the line stunk and the receivers aren't that good? Is Carter Hart a product of what was in front of him, or was there some troubling signs? Who is the goaltender that we were all excited about?
I think it's a little bit of both. I'll say the defense in front of him doesn't help at all. And I think that he also got away from some of the things that made him so good the year before because he tried to overcompensate for that, like to try to be in position to make the desperation save at all times and do what he had to keep them in the game. And it made him lose some of his positioning. He was allowing a lot of goals by doing that, which made him lose confidence. I don't see it. I'm not concerned about him. I really think he can bounce back. I think that at the very least, it changes your outlook on he needs a contract this offseason. He's restricted free agent, so he'll be back, but he needs a contract. I wouldn't be shocked if this changes the outlook on what we thought he was going to get. I think last year we looked at him, the playoffs, the whole big picture of him having a successful year and then the playoffs, and basically saw contracts like the one Matt Murray got in Ottawa, which was, I think, 5 years and a little over $5 million, and said that's the marker right there. That's going to be the comparison for when Carter Hart needs the long-term deal to keep him around. And now I think you're doing a bridge deal at this point, just to pay him what he probably has earned through the first 3 years of his career collectively, and then set him up for a bigger payday down the road should he return to form. I think he just needs that. He kind of needs that practice time. He needs the offseason. He needs all of that type of stuff. But I think the foundation of what he is still there, and it's unfortunate. I don't think he would have sat out the rest of the year if there wasn't kind of conveniently an injury at the time that there was. If he wasn't hurt, he would have played down the stretch. He would have tried to finish off his season on some high notes here. And I mean, he did win his last game in a shootout, which is certainly a good way to go out, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more from him for the rest of the year, but it is what it is. He gets the offseason now. He's already been skating, which is a good sign, so it means he's going to have the full offseason to do what he has to do and kind of get back to all of the things in his foundation that got him to where he is. But I think he's that kind of goalie, and I think that he can return to that form.
Kevin Durso, at Kevin_Durso. Flyers and Devils tonight, right here on 97.3 ESPN. The final puck drop of the season for the Fly Guys. The puck drops at 7 o'clock, and you can hear all the action here on 97.3 ESPN. But all eyes on the Flyers this offseason, a very intriguing offseason, and we know what's going to happen next year. You miss the playoffs, they make the playoffs next year. So that's been a 10-year run, so we know it's going to continue. They should be back, but how do they get there? We shall see. All right, Durso, great stuff as always, pal.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right, Kevin Durso, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Coming up, we got plenty more to go, including Football at 4. Football at 4 is on the way. Sports Bash is brought to you by Matt Blatt Kia. They want to get you approved today. Matt Blatt Kia, 6211 Black Horse Pike, Egg Harbor Township. Bob Wankel will talk some Phils a little bit later. Jeff Kerr on the NFL. And Do You Remember is back on a Monday. We will start our new Do You Remember segments. We'll get those back and going because I got some good ones today. Don't go away. This is the Sports Bash. Mosher, Football at 4, coming up next.